Hello and good evening. You're watching AWANI Tonight with me, Hafiz Marzukhi. No bodies have been found from the gas pipeline fire in Putra Heights, Subang Jaya. Selangor Police Chief Datuk Hussein Omar Khan says efforts are now focused on stabilizing the ground at the site.
He said following stabilization works, authorities would be able to carry out further investigations into the incident. A preliminary report is expected within 2 weeks, with a full report due another 2 weeks after that. Police have also opened one investigation paper focusing on possible mischief and negligence. Hussein added that earthworks had been underway to replace a sewage pipe about 30 meters from the site of the explosion, but were halted 2 days before the incident occurred. An excavator is also believed to be buried under the blast site.
The Selangor government will provide assistance to school students who were victims of the gas pipeline fire in Putra Heights, Subang Jaya. According to Menteri Besar Datuk Seri Amiruddin Syari, school supplies and uniforms will be distributed to affected students due to head back to school next Monday.
The aid is being channeled through Yayasan Islam Darul Ihsan in line with the wishes of Selangor ruler Sultan Sharafuddin Idris Shah. Earlier this week, the Education Ministry announced a 1,000 ringgit assistance for more than 100 of its affected staff, including teachers and students. Meanwhile, the Higher Education Ministry said it will provide medicine, counselling and humanitarian aid to victims staying at the relief centre in the Putra Heights Mosque. Its Minister, Datuk Seri Zamri Abdul Kadir, said efforts were underway to identify impacted students to ensure they receive the necessary support to continue their studies.
Discussions on the latest tariff measures by the Trump administration will take place at the upcoming ASEAN Finance Ministers and Central Bank Governors meeting. Second Finance Minister Datuk Seri Amir Hamzah Azizan says private dialogues will be held to address the potential impact on regional economies.
According to Amir Hamzah, the matter was not originally on the primary agenda of the meeting, which would be held from April 7th to 10th in Kuala Lumpur. Based on early feedback, he said most ASEAN member states had adopted a similar stance of choosing not to impose retaliatory tariffs. Amir Hamzah added that Malaysia was engaging in discussions with the US through its institutions and government officials. He said this was to gain clarity on President Donald Trump's intentions and to explore ways to reduce the impact or scale of the tariffs.
In response to the Trump administration's latest tariff measures, the Malaysian government has opted for negotiations with the US rather than taking the retaliatory route. Doris Liu from IDEAS Malaysia outlines other strategies the government can consider in its trade relations with Washington.
Right now, meetings focus on engagement and constructive dialogue is quite welcome rather than escalation. And it also makes sense to have a measured diplomatic approach, especially for a small open economies like ours. In fact, negotiation could be more beneficial also in the long term. So if you look at how the US has calculated the new tariff rates, the White House, they published a methodology about this. So it's simply half of the US trade deficit with a country divided by its total imports from that country. So for Malaysia, if we work out the math, there is a $24.8 billion in trade deficit for Malaysia. And if you divide it by imports from Malaysia to the US of 52.5 billion, and then half it, that gives you 24% of tariff, which aligns with the announced tariff rate, actually. So rather than viewing this as like a targeted move that the US has on Malaysia, it appears to be just like a broader formulaic strategy. So that gives us a clearer basis of negotiation. Malaysia could also consider direct engagement with the US, possibly exploring something like a bilateral free trade agreement, or even supporting efforts to establish a US-ASEAN regional trade framework with the US, because right now we see that Mexico and Canada are largely not affected by this tariff measure because they have the North American free trade agreements that's already in place to protect their industry. Whereas for ASEAN region and Malaysia in particular, we don't have those free trade agreements with the US. So looking to negotiate some kind of broader framework would be a next step forward and will be a good step for MITI to explore.
As we await further details on the US tariffs, how should Malaysian businesses act to mitigate potential negative impacts? Doris discusses the likelihood of a broader shift in global supply chains away from Malaysia.
A broad-based shift in global supply chains, particularly away from Malaysia, is unlikely in the near term. That's because Malaysia still holds a competitive advantage in several key sectors, particularly in semiconductors and high-value electronics manufacturing, where we play a critical role in the global supply chain. So these industries require specific skill sets, labor that Malaysia currently already have based on our existing manufacturings mostly in Malaysia, in Penang. We have established manufacturing and infrastructure requirements and regulatory stability. So this Malaysia continues to offer, and it's hard for the industries to move elsewhere. And right now, this current round of tariff is quite widespread. So it affects not only Malaysia, but multiple countries and sectors. This makes supply chain reconfiguration even more complex and costly for multinational firms. So rather than immediately relocating, many companies may just adopt a wait-and-see approach to maintain their existing operations while monitoring any kind of tariff developments or geopolitical risks. So Malaysia's relative competitiveness may actually improve, especially compared to our neighbors like Vietnam and Thailand and Indonesia, which are hit by even higher tariffs right now.
At the same time, Doris outlined several opportunities to strategically adapt.
So realistically, Malaysian businesses are likely to either absorb some of the additional costs, wherever possible, pass them on to consumers. So either way, we will see business costs will increase. That's kind of unavoidable. But the key now is how businesses respond strategically moving forward. So of course, firstly, diversification is important. So both in supply chains and also export destination. And that's where our participation in regional trade agreements like CPTPP, RCEP, and ASEAN Plus framework becomes even more critical in these new dynamics. So these agreements will open up alternative markets and reduce our barriers when it offers up some buffer against tariff shocks. But we also have to see that finding new markets actually isn't easy. So this round of tariffs, since it affects a broad set of countries, and if everyone is trying to diversify and if businesses are trying to mitigate it at the same time, the reality is that there's just not enough global demand to absorb all that redirected trade. So that said, we do currently have some low-hanging fruit. So for instance, the EU-Malaysia Free Trade Agreement, currently under negotiation since January, presents a real opportunity to improve our market access to Europe, which could be another big new demand market for our high-value semiconductor industry. And if concluded successfully, I think it can be a game changer for sectors looking to pivot westward. That said, still business need to brave for a more difficult landscape ahead, like higher operating costs, tighter margin, and potentially reduced demands in a lot of key markets.
We'll go for a short break. Stay with us.
Menggaruk kulit kepala disebabkan keluh mumur, masalahnya lebih mendalam. Gunalah Head & Shoulders menembusi 5 lapisan untuk membasmi keluh mumur dan kegatalan. Bebas keluh mumur sehingga 100%. Head & Shoulders diuji secara dermatologi. Dimasak seikhlas rasa. Air tangan insan istimewa. Masak bersama Harmoni Raya. Dapatkan resepi inspirasi di Maggi.my.
Dah cuba elak panas terik? Tapi kulit kepala masih gatal dan berminyak. Mungkin ia kelemomo. Gunalah Head and Shoulders. Berkesan menghapuskan kelemomo sehingga 100% bebas kelemomo. Head and Shoulders.
Di dalam setiap berita yang dibawa, konteks amat penting. Kami sentiasa membawakan yang tergempar dan terkini. Pastikan Astro AWANI menjadi pilihan anda, tidak kira di mana sahaja anda berada.
US President Donald Trump has offered his support for French far-right leader Marine Le Pen. This comes after a Paris court earlier this week convicted her and 24 people from her National Rally Party of embezzling funds from the European Union.
In a Truth Social post, Trump described the case against Le Pen as a witch hunt, drawing parallels with his own legal issues and praised the French leader. Le Pen was handed a 5-year ban on running for political office, barring her from the 2027 presidential election unless she could overturn the ruling on appeal beforehand. She was also handed a 4-year prison sentence, 2 years of which are suspended and 2 years to be served under house arrest, as well as a €100,000 fine. The figurehead of the National Rally had been seen as the front-runner for the next election. The judge is reportedly now under police protection after facing death threats, with her supporters and party allies accusing the trial judges of interfering in democracy.
South Korea's Constitutional Court today unanimously voted to uphold the impeachment of President Yoon Suk-yeol. Following his exit from office, a snap election must now be held within 60 days to elect his replacement.
In his first remarks after the verdict, Yoon apologized for failing to live up to the expectations of the South Korean people. Screams of both joy and disappointment were reported as demonstrators from pro- and anti-Yoon camps watched the ruling on live broadcasts. Police have been on standby in case of any violent protests following Yoon's ouster. His short-lived declaration of martial law last December had plunged the country into political turmoil. Parliament later voted to impeach him, leading to the suspension of his powers. Now, without his presidential immunity, Yoon could face additional charges on top of his ongoing insurrection case, which will go to trial at a later date. In the meantime, Prime Minister Han Duck-soo is now running the government as acting president, a role he resumed last week after the Constitutional Court dismissed his own impeachment.
That wraps up AWANI Tonight. Check out our web portal, keeping you informed on the critical events shaping our world, all in one place at international.astroawani.com. That's all for now. I'm Hafiz Marzukhi. Thanks for watching and good night.